Cap too.
Yes.
Oh my God, awesome. We got a ticker at the bottom. Whoa.
Feels so official.
Hey everyone, we are so excited for you to be here. We're going to get started in just a moment. We're just getting everything set up. We have some new tech. We have a ticker at the bottom. Our names look slightly different. It's all really good. Jordan, what's one thing you're looking forward to this week?
This week? Well, there's the debate tomorrow night. And for most political journalists, this is going to either be the highlight or the low light, depending on how much work they have to do at or following the debate. But I know, especially after the last performance between Biden and Trump, I definitely know I'm going to be glued to my TV set. But if not that, the Lions winning yesterday was definitely already the highlight of my week.
Nice. I love that you said TV set. Do you plan on actually watching in front of a TV, or are we talking like a stream on YouTube?
Oh yeah, no, like we are kind of lame. We went out, we bought a TV antenna that you can just get from Best Buy. You get like 50 miles worth of channels. So we get to watch our local news and get to watch any of those kind of like carried TV stations. So yes, cool. I'm an old woman who watches TV news on the TV.
That's perfect. People get their news all sorts of ways. We love it. Well, we're going to get started. Welcome to Bridge Elections FAQ, a live discussion where we want to answer your questions about the 2024 election. I'm Isabel Lohman, the host at Bridge Michigan. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan news outlet. We have our full slate of Capitol reporters here today. We have Lauren Gibbons, Jordan Hermany, and Simon Schuster. We've got a lot to talk about today. We'll talk about Republicans and how they're talking about abortion, how Democrats are talking about electrical vehicles, and the ongoing sticker price shock that people are feeling at the pump and at the grocery store. We will also answer your questions. So if you have a question for our reporters, you can drop them in the chat and we will get to them later in the program. You can also ask a question on our website, bridgemi.com. Jordan already sort of previewed it, but we know that there's a big debate tomorrow. It's between Harris and Trump, of course. We all know what happened at the last debate. I want you all to give me your best prediction. Let's start with you, Lauren.
I have a feeling the word weird will come up at least 10 times.
Cool. We can keep a little ticker. Jordan?
Yeah, Lauren kind of stole my gag. Weird is definitely going to come up in the debate, but I'm actually really interested to hear them talk about EVs. I have no doubt that that's going to come up, and especially with how pertinent that is to Michigan and Michigan's economy. Definitely going to be watching for any mentions of that and our lovely Mitten State.
Simon?
I think this is going to be a two-way attack fest. I think that, while the audience that's watching this debate, all voters in Michigan and the United States have a good idea of what Donald Trump is standing for, it's not the same case with Kamala Harris. And so we're going to hear from the Democratic nominee here, try to detail a little bit about what she stands for in her platform and why it matters, while also attacking Donald Trump. But I think Donald Trump is going to, one, hit her for being too vague. And then when she does specify what she wants, probably hit her for being too far left.
Okay, so you thought about your prediction a lot. Cool. Okay. Well, Bridge will be providing coverage of the debate tomorrow, so stick with us this week. Jordan, back in 2022, the Supreme Court had overturned Roe versus Wade, and abortion was on the ballot in Michigan. Fast forward to 2 years later, how are Republican candidates talking about abortion?
Yeah, so it's a really interesting topic of conversation. I do want to highlight, in 2022, after the fall of Roe, Democrats were really able to mobilize on this topic, especially in Michigan. We ended up with our first legislative trifecta in several decades. And they're really hoping Democrats in 2024 to catch that same lightning in a bottle this time around. And I think 22 Republicans really saw the writing on the wall when it comes to the topic, where a vast majority of people, not just in Michigan, but in this country, do support abortion with exceptions, for rape, incest, life of the mother. And you're starting to kind of see that reflected on the national level with how Donald Trump speaks of abortion. At one point in time, he took very handed credit for, quote unquote, killing Roe. But now you're starting to see that with Roe overturned, many pro-life individuals thought that the next logical step was going to say, hey, here's a blanket nationwide abortion ban. And Trump, looking to 22, he saw the writing on the wall that it's not popular, that Republicans aren't really winning when it comes to that subject itself. So his own approach to abortion is starting to soften. You're starting to hear him talk about leaving this kind of thing up to the states, that he has waffled on a level of an abortion ban that he would support, if any. He'll make a statement and just as quickly back off from it. And now we're starting to see that translate down ballot. We have certain races where Republicans have come out in the past very fervently. I'm thinking of, for example, in the 10th, Representative John James, who's running again. He in the past compared abortion to genocide and claimed that he was 100% pro-life all the way. Now he's saying that abortion should be left up to the states. And that seems like a really interesting position to try and square if, not even 4-6 years ago, you were calling the very topic a genocide. And we can see that all over, especially in many of our highly competitive districts. Republicans who may have been or still are very emphatically pro-life don't make mention of it on their campaign websites now. They don't talk about the subject as frequently, and they surely don't bring it up unless it's prompted.
At the same time, Democrats want to bring this up, right? They are saying that abortion is on the ballot both in Michigan and across the country. Is that message resonating with Michigan voters?
So it's an interesting little catch-22, right? Because if you ask certain Republicans, especially in those more combative districts, they'll say no. The topic of abortion was settled in 22 with our constitutional amendment, but Democrats are really trying to push that, especially if you've heard of Project 2025. There is a long mention in there of how abortion could be made illegal at the federal level without use of the president or Congress. So they're pointing to that as saying that abortion still is on the ballot, especially in Michigan and places where the law has quote unquote been settled. And we're starting to see that reflected in polling. The Glenn Gariff group just not long after the primary did a statewide survey where they found that while the economy was the number one issue that voters were saying was most important to them heading into the polls, abortion came in at number 2. So it's not a non-issue as much as Republicans would want it to be, but whether it's going to deliver that same lightning in a bottle that Democrats saw in 2022, I guess we're just going to have to stay tuned on.
And you mentioned that poll. I'm going to keep the focus on you, Jordan. That poll also talks about voters' opinions on the economy and inflation. We're going back and back again to the idea that the economy really matters, of course. You recently spent some time in the 7th District. There's a tight race between Republican Tom Barrett and Democrat Curtis Hertel. They want to replace U.S. Rep. Elissa Slotkin, who's currently running for Senate. What do voters say about the economy in that area of the state?
I mean, frankly, they feel like they've been beaten up by it. When I went all over the district for about a week, just chatting with voters of all sorts, some farmers, some deli workers at Kroger, and all of them are pretty much saying the same thing, that, to have a family, to buy groceries in the economy nowadays, while inflation may be going down, it doesn't feel like that way to their pocketbooks. Talking to voters who say that they desperately need a new car, but they're trying to figure out how to balance rent and potentially trying to get out of an apartment at the same time. So it's a huge issue for voters in the 7th. I mean, it's a huge issue for voters statewide. The 7th isn't necessarily unique in that way. As we mentioned, that Glenn Gariff poll did put the economy, as our number one issue, and inflation was one of the top 3. So it's definitely something that voters are looking towards. They want a candidate who could potentially help them in any regard, lower the cost of living. But, while Curtis Hertel and Tom Barrett have told me that they have plans, I know Curtis Hertel mentioned basically something to the effect of helping to lower prescription drug prices or helping to crack down on corporate greed. Tom Barrett's talked about needing to curb the rate of overspending. It's really easy to talk on the campaign trail. It's a lot harder once elected to put the words to paper, so to speak. So if those candidates will have any success at lowering inflation, I guess we'll just have to wait and see who gets elected and how they do.
And I think it's important to note as well that this is not an issue that is localized to various places. This is a statewide issue. It's one that, the presidential race, the Senate race, even the race for state house, you're hearing economic issues come up quite a bit. And a big part of that reason is that even though at the national level, we're seeing pretty good trend lines when it comes to the economy, at the basic, average voter level, people are still feeling inflation. They're still feeling the strain of economic issues or higher prices at the grocery store. So as Jordan was talking about, this is a line that's coming up in a lot of races. Mike Rogers had an ad where he's talking about the grocery store prices specifically. So this is going to keep coming up, and I wouldn't be surprised if we hear about it at the debate tomorrow either.
For sure. And it's one of those things that people feel every single day, right? Some of these other topics we talk about, maybe you're not even in the market for an EV, so you don't think about it every day. But when you're buying your groceries and you're, making your car payment or paying for rent, you're going to feel that every step of the way. Jordan touched a little bit on putting pen to paper. Kamala Harris is releasing more details about her economic plan. She just released some details about the small business tax credit. Simon, what should our viewers know about this proposal?
Yeah, so Kamala Harris has released a variety of different economic plans, and they range from increasing the corporate income tax from 21% to 28% to also cutting taxes for the majority of lower income earners. But at the same time, she also wants to raise taxes on some of the highest income earners. According to some analyses from the Wharton budget model, her policies would reduce the average incomes of the top 0.1% by more than $167,000 per year, but the bottom 20% of earners are going to get about $2,300 more in income and benefits on an average year. At the same time, this spending plan, a lot like that of former President Donald Trump, is going to add to the deficit. It would increase spending by $2.3 trillion. And forecast that her plan is going to raising the corporate income tax would also produce another $1.1 trillion in tax revenues in part of an effort to sort of offset some of that spending. Another one of those plans includes giving $6,000 as a tax credit and an expanded child tax credit to parents, something that was really popular during the pandemic eras. So there's a variety of different proposals, but Donald Trump, when explaining his plans, which would increase the deficit even further, has said that the enormous economic stimulus that would just be so great that it's going to offset all of the deficits, which would exceed $22 trillion over 10 years. And so we're going to hear some more of these in the debate. And I think that we're going to see also Donald Trump attack her for not being more specific on some of this information.
Thanks for that, Simon. At the same time, we know that Republicans don't really want to talk about abortion. Sometimes Democrats don't really want to talk about electrical vehicles. This has come up a lot in the campaign. And like we've mentioned before, we expect this to come up at the debate. How has Kamala Harris been? What is her past with electrical vehicles, and what is she saying now about electrical vehicles? Lauren?
Yeah, so Vice President Harris has been asked a lot of questions recently about where her stance is now. In 2020, during her first presidential campaign, she supported requiring automakers to build only electric or hydrogen vehicles by 2035. She has not said whether she supports requiring that from automakers, and certainly that would be a pretty controversial stance to take among certain circles. But I think overall, this is a trend we're seeing from Vice President Harris of her campaign taking softer stances in the general election race than when she was running in a presidential primary in 2020, typically where you're trying to appeal to more progressive voters. She recently told CNN that her values have not changed, even if some specific policy ideas have. But you're certainly going to hear from Trump and other Republicans criticizing some of her past stances.
Do we have a very clear idea of what she wants to do with electrical vehicles if elected?
I think at this point, it's still not clear. Electric vehicles here in Michigan, the issue is pretty key because the state is investing heavily in luring battery manufacturing and investing in greener energy. But critics have argued that that shift could impact union jobs, many of which are in the auto industry. Putting together gas-powered vehicles. So it's going to be important. It's something that the Harris administration will most likely have to address. But I think at the current stage we're in, we just haven't seen a lot of detail.
You mentioned union workers. The Trump campaign has, campaigned with auto workers who say they're voting for Trump. How do workers at the big three, Ford, General Motors, Stellantis, how do they see these electrical vehicle policies?
Union leadership at the general level have been pretty supportive of Harris and other Democrats up and down the ticket. You saw UAW President Sean Fain during a DNC speech wearing a Trump is a scab shirt. So at the leadership level, it's been pretty consistent in supporting Democrats. But as in 2016 and 2020, Trump has also worked to appeal to rank and file union members. Going back to what I was just saying about the argument that the shift towards greener energy could jeopardize union jobs is something that Trump has hit on over and over again in Michigan stops.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note that like something really central to Trump's message, right, has been his criticism of international trade accords like NAFTA, which he said were a bad deal for America and translated to lost American jobs. The fact that he has, this idea of big tariffs being such a central part of his policy platform, these things appeal to auto workers, in particular in the rank and file, who saw, their colleagues lose jobs as jobs were outsourced to Mexico. And so Trump, a big part of his message is that he has sort of the prescription to solve these problems. Whether or not that's actually the case, of course, something that's up for debate, but it's such a central part of his message, and it strikes so at the heart of so many economic anxieties among these populations that it has resonated over the years.
And of course, not all auto workers are unionized, and we're getting some comments about that. Is there a clear distinction between what the unionized auto workers think about electrical vehicles versus those who are not unionized?
Yeah, I can touch on that. Certainly, I think some of the biggest electric vehicle manufacturers, the biggest in the country right now being Tesla, is not a primarily unionized workforce. And Elon Musk has intentionally avoided the unionization of those workforces and also has courted the support of Elon Musk. So there is definitely a bifurcation here in terms of organized labor on one side and then the non-unionized sector of this electric vehicle market on the other.
Thanks for that. If you all have questions for our reporters, you can put them in the chat. We've got some questions lined up from readers who submitted them ahead of time. We always appreciate that. Simon, one question we got is, do voters have to show their ID when they vote in Michigan?
Yes. So voters generally are required to show voter ID, either a state ID or a driver's license when voting on election day in person. Now, if they don't have an ID with them, or they just don't have an ID period, but are registered to vote, they could sign an affidavit that says, I'm a qualified elector and I have registered. And then if, of course, they're lying or committing fraud there, then that if that was flagged and found to be false, would be guilty of a criminal charge.
Thank you for that. We also had a reader who wanted to know why cities tend to vote Democratic. They asked, what is it that these voters see differently that always translate into a Democrat vote?
And I think that's kind of an interesting question. Certainly among larger metropolitan areas, it's no secret that they trend Democratic, whereas rural areas trend Republican. Although that's not always the case. Certainly we have seen some larger metro areas occasionally vote for Republicans or even have a history of voting for Republicans depending on the region. But it's for a lot of reasons, many of which are related to demographics of who typically lives where, education, income, occupation, socioeconomic status. There's a lot of factors in who voters choose to vote for. And so it's especially interesting that Democrats do congregate in cities, because while statewide turnout in cities can generally swing elections, it has been interesting in local districts or even during the redistricting process. Sometimes the congregation of so many Democrats in one area have led to a disparate spread. And that kind of goes to looking at some of the maps that you see with the red and blue voter profiles. If it's not addressing population in it, it could look like, oh, wow, more of the map is red than blue. But it really is just about population density. So it's an interesting issue and an interesting question for sure.
Yeah, I think it's also important to note, right, that this is a trend that's, when we say always vote Democratic, this historically is not like a long-standing trend. There's been a sorting through demographics. It's happened over a number of decades where, for example, if you go back a few decades, about 40 years, much of the Upper Peninsula, for example, was represented by Democrats in the state legislature. And as you see sort of the urbanization of the United States and the sorting that's occurred through also the suburbanization of the country, as more and more we have less diversity of socioeconomic status in different neighborhoods and less diversity of educational attainment in some of these neighborhoods, you're losing that diversity in terms of representation by party that's based purely upon, whether you're living in an urban setting or not.
Well, and it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy too, right? Where you have a bunch of people who believe in a similar set of ideals. So people say, hey, I want to move there. I'd like to be part of that. Or, hey, I don't like this. Let me move out of these, deeply blue areas. And that's also how you kind of end up getting your pockets of voting populations like that.
For sure. And anecdotally, you drive down your neighborhood, you see the same lawn signs over and over again. You believe that your neighbors believe something similar to what you believe, and maybe that is or isn't true. I mean, we saw that in 2020, that the polls weren't exactly accurate on how people actually felt about these things. We also had a reader who wanted to know if they can review their ballot after they've turned it in an election. How long are ballots stored before they're destroyed? Simon, do you know the answer?
Yeah, ballots are held onto for quite a long while. They have to go through the auditing process that happens for a long time after the election. I don't know if I could give you offhand a specific date from the top of my head for how long they're preserved for, but it's a sufficient enough time that the state can do all of its checks in order to assume that and to acquire the correct sample sizes of the statewide ballots to ensure that the vote was accurate and the count was accurate.
Gotcha. Thank you for that. And of course, this last cycle, we had people who were alleging that there was voter fraud, that there were things irregular about the ballots. Simon, can you talk just a little bit about how Bridge goes about fact-checking claims of election fraud and what we're going to be doing to make sure that we don't spread misinformation?
Yeah, I mean, one of the first things is ensuring that we have a good knowledge of the electoral procedures and the ways in which audits are conducted before or after the elections, how people look at the tabulating machines to ensure that those are also working and haven't been subjected to any sort of incorrect influence. So we do a number of different things, but those are just among some of them.
Perfect. Thank you for that. When we started Elections FAQ, Biden was running against Trump. Goshen wasn't quite as big of a deal. JD Vance wasn't on the national stage just yet. So a lot has changed in the last few months as we've been doing this show. But the thing that has been consistent is we want to answer your questions. We want to meet you where you're at. And if you have more questions, you can still go to our website at bridgemi.com. That's all the time we have for today, but we're so glad you spent part of your afternoon with us. You can visit our website, bridgemi.com, for more politics and election coverage. We'll be following the debate and fact-checking things. You can also sign up for our free Politics Watch newsletter at bridgemi.com/sign up. We're so excited that you spent part of your time with us, and we'll see you next week.